You're listening to Wise Women with Daisy Khan, where faith rolls up its sleeves as a force for good, and where women define the future with wisdom and wonder. I'm Daisy Khan. Kindly subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Welcome to a new series, The Muslim Women Project, where I feature 100 Muslim women of power and authority, shaping their destiny, community, and society at large. Welcome back, friends. With a war raging all over the Middle East, I am focusing today's episode on the people of Iran, because my connection to this story is very personal. When I trace back my own activism, it really began around the Iranian Revolution. I was often the only Muslim in the room, the only one expected to answer questions about the death chance to America and the revolution I barely understood. I remember feeling very unprepared because I had no context. Islam, as I knew it, did not resemble what was being broadcast on television. And so I wrote a letter to Newsday. And that moment forced me to begin learning, speaking, engaging, not defensively, but responsibly. And now here we are, 47 years later, as events are unfolding in real time, I'm finding myself returning to that same question. Who are the Iranians beyond the state? What are their beliefs? What is their cultural memory? And how does a civilization that gave us Hafiz and Rumi understand itself today? More importantly, how have global powers contributed to the hardship of Iranian citizens? And so today's conversation is about understanding the history, the culture, the religion, and the lived reality of Iranians in Iran as well as in the diaspora. So my guest today is Kamin Mohammadi, an author, journalist, broadcaster, editor, and public speaker. Her work explores identity, exile, and deeper soul of Iran beyond the headlines. Her two books are The CYPRESS Tree, A Love Letter to Iran, and Bella Figura, How to Live Life, Love, and Eat the Italian Way. Welcome, Kamin, to Wise Women.
Thank you so much.
All right. This is a very tense time for Iranians living in diaspora. And before we get into wartime reality, I want you to touch upon Iran as a civilization. Just give us a flavor for what this nation is all about. How it has survived over the millennia.
And I've recently become a convert to this phrase, which I've heard Gen Z using, which is it's a civilizational culture, by which we mean it is the base of our human culture. Iran is a huge country, Daisy. It's like putting Germany, France, and Spain together, the three biggest countries in Europe. We have a population of over 90 million. Iranians have been on the Iranian plateau for some people say you could take it 7,000 years, and we're the oldest piece of land continuously inhabited by the same race in the world. What that means is our culture is deeply rooted inside of us. We have a very, very deep connection with the actual soil of our homeland. And I think that must come from these millennia of really being there. And when I say uninterrupted, it's not that we have not been invaded. We have massively been invaded over time, but we have always held our culture, and it's often the invaders that have adapted to us rather than the other way around. I guess most people, if they know anything about Iran from a historical context, they will know about the Persian Empire. We're talking about 500 BC. We are contemporaries with ancient Greece. I often wonder why people in the West have so much ignorance about Iran and the Persian Empire. I remember walking into a school in London once and seeing a project that the kids had been doing, and it went all around the wall, and it was a sort of breakdown of history timeline with all of the different empires, and there was no Persian Empire on there.
Wow.
I also remember in Italy helping my stepchildren do their history homework. It was all about the Greeks and the Romans. They even had China in there, the Phoenicians, but no Persian Empire.
Wow.
One of the reasons for that is history in the West come from Greek historians who were writing not just history, but a kind of propaganda. They were writing about the enemy when Persia was the enemy of Greece in very derogatory terms. You also realize that in the roots of the Western imagination, Persians are the original other. We are the civilized, democracy-bearing, skirt-wearing Spartans, and the Persians are the other. So the first Persian Empire was basically pretty much the whole of the known world. It came all the way to the Danube River in what is Europe now, and east to the Indus. And it never had a decline. It did not do what empires have always done. And I think it stayed strong because the dynasty was a very strong kind of family concern. And they had ancient peoples that they had conquered, such as the Elamites and the Medes. So Persian, Elamite, Mede, it's all Iran. We're talking about 7,000 years. The Greek Alexander conquered Persia, and he set on fire the great palace of Persepolis, and he carried away with him the wealth of Persia on something like 45 camels, I believe. And he vandalized the place. He burnt it down before becoming extremely Persianized, to the point that his own people were annoyed about it. We had another 2 Persian empires after that, until finally the Arabs came in 630 something, I think, and they brought Islam. You have up until then 1,000 years of uninterrupted Persian history and Zoroastrianism. Islam is, of course, the religion of Iran, but we have 1,000 years of non-Muslim Iranian history behind us.
That's why even among the diaspora, you carry some traditions that are not even Islamic, like Nowruz is such an important international holiday. It's practiced with such vigor. So there's a lot of cultural traditions that you have carried on.
Absolutely. When the Arabs invaded Iran, Nowruz, it's beyond. And it's also not just Iranian, so it's all Iranic people. There's also people in the Central Asian republics that still celebrate Nowruz, Iranic and Persianate cultures that carry it. Nowruz, look, to this day, even in being in Iran during the Islamic Republic, there's plenty of Muslim, of course, holidays and saints' days and Shia stuff, but Nowruz is the most important thing. And the first year after the revolution, there was some talk of trying to cancel Nowruz because it was, and trying to shut down Persepolis because initially they wanted to get rid of every evidence of Iran's non-Muslim past. But actually, the people of Shiraz got up with sticks and went and literally with their own bodies defended this, because this is part of our identity. Our identity is not that we're Muslims. Our identity is that we're Iranian. Our identity is not formed by our religion.
Yeah, it's a very strong culture. And that's what gave rise to poetry and the aesthetics, and all of these cultural symbols have been transported to the world. I don't know a single ballroom that doesn't have a Persian rug.
Well, indeed, has been really influential, but relatively little known for that. Yeah.
But I guess in some ways that keeps you rooted to that culture beyond the headlines, right?
100%, given how many people also have historically been constantly exiled from Iran by one regime or another, and how strong our diaspora is. There's no official figures for how many we are in diaspora, but we're many millions. And of course, our culture is very much what keeps us connected to each other, to our land. And I would say that the relationship with Islam is part of that. There is beautiful things that Islam has given our culture as well. And this is something that's missing from Western analysts when they tend to go, oh, look, Iranians are actually kind of Persians, and they try and cancel that part of it. It's way more complicated than that. I remember a journalist called Christopher Hitchens was sent to Iran, and he wrote a rather beautiful piece. And then I took issue with the last paragraph, in which he had discovered that Iranians are not these mad American haters, but that they're very kind, sophisticated people, very hospitable, beautiful food, beautiful place, all of this. And he'd obviously really fallen under the spell. And then he did something that people in the West often do. He differentiated the Persianness from Islam. And he said they just need to get rid of this thing. And I don't know why we find it sometimes it's so hard to hold complexity. When the Arabs, they found a country that was extremely fed up with the ruling class because the empire had become bloated and corrupted. The Sassanid Empire made Zoroastrianism the religion of the Persians, they tied it up with the state. And so they had a very influential priesthood that had become really corrupted. And I think a lot of people were glad and wanted something new. And Islam wouldn't have stayed our religion for all of this time if Iranians themselves hadn't somehow fallen in love with this and found their own sort of soul expression through it. It was quite some time later when Iran became Shia Muslim as opposed to Sunni. That came with the Safavid Empire, the 14th century. The Safavid family were Shia Muslims. They wanted to differentiate from this growing Ottoman Empire. So that's been the history of Islam in the country.
Iran is formerly an Islamic republic, right? And that's rooted in Shia theology. And every time I see these Islamic republics, I see a gap between the lived reality of religion and the state ideology, which is so far apart. How do you explain this distinction to somebody who doesn't know Iran?
Thank you. Interesting question. I grew up in the 1970s in Iran under the Pahlavi Shah. Iran had very rapidly modernized under his father, who had been put into power in 1925 by the British. This was not a homegrown sort of dynasty. So he was called Reza Khan. He was picked out. Imperial Britain and Russia pre-revolution were engaged in the Great Game because Britain didn't want Russia to take Iran because they wanted to be able to access their colonies in India. And obviously Russia didn't want Britain to take Iran. And there was this great game. Iran was a pawn. The first revolution of last century, because Iran had 3 revolutions. The first one was the constitutional revolution of 1906, because Iranians wanted sovereignty, the kind of democracy to be able to rule ourselves. We were ruled by an incredibly corrupt, awful kind of dynasty of Shahs called the Qajar dynasty, who was selling off bits and pieces of the land in order to pay off their own gambling debts. So there was the constitutional revolution, and it was not in the interests of Russia or the British. So they squashed it, and that went on for some years. But a constitution was written based on the Belgian constitution, funnily enough. A Majlis, our parliament, was set up. So it was the beginning of this system that has culminated today because of the Great Game. There was a Cossack regiment run by the Russians in the Iranian army, and the Brits spotted a promising army officer. He was called Reza Khan. He was illiterate. He came from who knows where and nothing. They saw some potential in him. They raised him up until the time in 1925 when he crowned himself king and became Shahanshah, the Shah of Shahs.
But he was not of any noble blood.
No, he was
not a noble class.
He was a tool of the British, particularly in this moment when we have his grandson trying to get himself back to Iran via bombing his own land. I just want people to understand we're not talking about a great dynasty that has been uninterrupted since Cyrus the Great. This guy's grandfather was an army officer put there because he served the British interests at that point. We're all about oil because oil was discovered in 1908, I believe. Reza Shah then rapidly modernized the country. He was very simpatico to Hitler and the German cause, and the Germans had the concession to build all the railways across Iran. Second World War happened. The British are not really happy about this, so they get rid of Reza Shah, take him off the throne, and they give it to his son, which was Mohammad Reza, who was the last Shah. Yeah. This son was not illiterate. Indeed, he had been brought up in Swiss finishing schools, so he was completely the other way. So Mossadegh was democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran. We're talking about 1950 at this point. Some few years later, Mossadegh says we need to nationalize our oil industry, at which point the Shah runs away. And he is then brought back in a CIA and MI6 engineered coup. So basically the Brits and the Americans made sure that we could not have our own democratically elected leader. The Shah, who was in their pay, was put back on the throne, and our oil, which we were trying to take control of, continued to flow to Britain and America. That's when the American era in Iran started. It was in the 50s after that. And I would say one of the direct results of that coup in 1953 was the 1979 revolution. What the revolution was about, because it was not actually religious in nature. The revolution was about sovereignty, Daisy. It was about wanting the colonizers and the imperialists out, and for us to rule ourselves and to enjoy the profits of our own resources. In 1951, when Mossadegh passed the Oil Nationalization Act in the Majlis, and my father was in there watching that, just in that 1 year alone, Britain had earned more from Iranian oil than Iran had in the 50 years previously. So, of course, Mossadegh wasn't allowed to succeed. And one of the results of the oil nationalization crisis was the Suez crisis, because it triggered other countries in the region to start taking their resources back from imperial powers. We've seen all the way along that as soon as Iran wants to take back our own resources and our own power, our own sovereignty, we've been interfered with. The 79 revolution bears some hallmarks of that, even though it was anti-imperialist.
So now you have 40-something years of rule and the sanctions that were placed on Iran as a result of those tensions. Now we have this dysfunctional relationship with the West. I want you to explain the psychology of the Iranian people, the constant pressure to have to live under the sanctions. And has that led to this entrenchment of this clerical class? What I'm saying is, had there been no sanctions, would Iran have evolved differently?
Of course, every way along, every opportunity, every point along the line since 1978, let's say, it's been missed opportunities. And it's very bitter as a person who studies history to look at how our desires for sovereignty have always been strangled and manipulated, because there was so much opposition to the Shah. And most of what I saw as a child, because I saw the revolution happen, it wasn't an Islamic revolution. That was not part of the conversation. The people who were revolutionaries, my own family, they were students, Marxist, socialists. They were parties that still exist that are left-wing. All about social justice is really what it was about. And then there was the religious faction. But the religious faction, again, because the last Shah was a dictator and he was authoritarian, he did actually kill dissent. He didn't allow any opposition. And so the only place the opposition could go was the mosque.
Yep.
Because that's the only place safely where people could hold meetings.
That's the only place where you have a microphone.
Right. And of course, because we are a Shia Muslim country, lots of people are devout. And the devotion I'd seen in my own family growing up had nothing to do with this kind of political Islam that then came. Because the people that I know who are really deeply religious Muslim Shia, they're lit up from the inside. It's like they have this divine light, and that's because they have a personal relationship with God. They're devoted, and Islam is the way that they express that devotion. And I find their practices and the idea of Islam, even what it means, actually very beautiful. But at the same time, it's been changed, twisted, politicized. So Khomeini was speaking out. He was an Ayatollah. He then was exiled by the Shah. He was doing sermons which would be smuggled into Iran on cassette tapes and distributed through the mosques.
I remember those days, the cassette tape days.
Right, you remember?
People may be wondering, what is a cassette tape?
Khomeini was seen as a central unifying figure. So all the political parties, factions, decided that they could coalesce under him because he was a charismatic figure. He had this ability to reduce really complex political arguments into really simple words that ordinary people could understand. Okay.
Simple soundbite.
He summed up all of Iran's problems by just saying, the Shah must go. That's it. The leaders of all of these parties, revolutionaries, said he has appeal and he's a simple priest. He doesn't want power. That's what he kept saying. I don't want power. I just want to come, and then there'll be a referendum and I'm going to go straight to my seminary. But of course, that's not how it turned out, because the first thing he did when he came back to the country was he didn't go to Qom. He went to a house in the south of Tehran and he set up an alternative government. Literally, we had a government. He set up an alternative. He went, this is the power base. It's me. And by the way, let's all have a referendum. Islamic Republic, yes or no? No one knew what an Islamic Republic meant. There was no debate. It wasn't an election. It was a referendum. Referendums are interesting tools because they're yes or no answers. You're not having a plurality of voices and choices and debates.
Yeah.
They say, Islamic Republic, yes or no? At that point, I was still in the country. Okay, I was 9, but I was there. I see younger Iranians debating this, and they seem like they're really convinced by the fact that there was a 98% turnout and 98% said yes. And they're like, oh, everyone wanted that. And you just think, are you stupid? I'm sorry, but my parents went to vote, and I'll tell you exactly how it was. It was not a closed ballot. It was not secret. There were guards standing outside who, as people went in, as they patted their guns, they would say to people in that very Persian way where you don't say things out loud, they would say, you know how to vote.
Yeah.
So I'm amazed that the younger generation doesn't understand that might have happened. And also that you have a country and a people, as you do now, who were so keen to get rid of the last guy that they weren't really voting for something. They were voting against something. And what it is that they were voting for was never explained. It was never outlined. Nobody in Iran was going to sign up to a system that was going to kill their children for showing some hair. That's not Islam.
If we could also just explain to people, because going to the current day will just take the head off, and all of a sudden the entire governance structure is going to collapse, and we're going to come in and we're going to just take over and plant somebody in. Can we just explain the governance of what is the political system? It may be a hybrid system. You have the Ayatollah at the top, then there are constitution. What is the pecking order?
Thank you, Daisy. Yes, it's exactly as you say. It's a system where there's two things happening at once. You have the Ayatollah, who originally was Khomeini, and when he came in, he decided to do something called Velayat-e-Faqih. Velayat-e-Faqih means that the supreme leader is the direct representative of God on earth, right? So that's quite a big deal. That is not a system that existed before he decided that he invented it. Now, when he then died eventually, another supreme leader was voted in. Now, so the supreme leader is the political head, but he's also the spiritual head. He held all of the power. But alongside that, you have the parliament, the Majlis, which is elected and voted for. You have the president, who is elected by the people. You have this other center of power, the Guardian Council, who are not elected by the people, who are basically the most senior kind of ayatollahs and priests in the country, but they're the ones who elect the supreme leader. When the supreme leader pops off, they managed to kill Khamenei, and now, of course, the Guardian Council must be meeting to elect his successor. Many analysts have thought that the Velayat-e-Faqih was really only valid with Khomeini because he was this charismatic leader that people were. Khamenei did not carry the same weight as he did,
right?
As far as I understand. Spiritually, Khamenei, of course, he was an Ayatollah. He was a very shrewd political operator. And he had come up through the Iran-Iraq war, which happened straight after the revolution, and was one of the reasons that the new Islamic Republic was able to entrench itself and become as repressive as it did. Because before that war started, for example, they tried to make women wear the hijab, and women just didn't accept it. My auntie used to tell me that she was a state worker, so at first they made people who work directly for the government, you have to wear it in government offices. And she would say we would all come out at the end of the day, and we would all stand on the steps of the office, and we'd all shake our heads, and our headscarves would flutter down like butterflies. So women weren't accepting, no one was accepting this stuff. Then there was a war, and in the interests of national security, you can pass almost anything. That's why what's happening now is really dangerous, because this might actually make the regime much more hardline. Because through war, you wipe out your opposition, you make sure that there is only one sort of narrative. It's the fact that the Islamic Republic was forged during 8 years of war that has made it so strong.
You mean the Iran-Iraq War?
The Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to
And
1988.
that's where they learned all the tactics, and that's where they probably started building up all kinds of weapons. And
of course they did, because at the end because that was an illegal war and the international community didn't care. Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons on Iranian civilians. This is a huge story. No one knows about it. No one's talking. No one. Iran, and I am the expert. I wrote about it. I investigated. I won awards for this work. I ended up briefing. I was on an anti-war platform. 20-something years ago, we've been trying to stop this day. And I briefed the cabinet in Whitehall. I did a briefing on Capitol Hill. I have been taking this story everywhere to try and show why it is that Iran might not trust the rest of the world, and why it might, even though it has never said that it wants nuclear weapons, why it should, maybe it can develop a nuclear program. And the reason is because, Daisy, in all of those illegal attacks, in all of those chemical attacks against soldiers, against civilians, Iran called out to the international community so many times, and they did not investigate until the year before the war ended. Okay? And so at the end of the war, Rafsanjani, who then became president, was a big political figure in Iran, said at the end of that war, this war has shown us that international law, when it comes to Iran, international law is nothing but ink on paper. And the reason why I was taking this story around the world is I was trying to explain to people why Iranian officials mistrust the international community. Because it's true, they've seen that. They've seen that international law does not apply when it's being violated in order to harm Iran, as we're seeing right now. This illegal war, no one is condemning it, apart from Spain. Yeah. So Iran, you know, this siege mentality of the regime, this we are alone and cut off from the world and there is nobody to help us, and even international law does not protect us. This is a really major reason why the regime behaves the way that it does, and why it has become so entrenched. So it is a system that works. To think that you're going to take out Khomeini and the system is going to collapse is frankly idiotic. And as we've seen, they took Khomeini out on the first day. That was nearly a week ago. The regime hasn't collapsed, and it won't.
Yeah, and the Revolutionary Guard to uphold everything.
And the Revolutionary Guard were instigated by Khomeini when he came in, because he didn't think that he could necessarily trust the military, the police, and the people. So he instituted the Revolutionary Guard. Because of sanctions, the Revolutionary Guard has become extremely powerful in ways that what is essentially a militia should not be. They have their tentacles in every area of Iranian industry and life. So after the war, someone needed to rebuild Iran. Because of sanctions, it could have been lovely Italian companies making the money, but no one was allowed to work with Iran. So Iran had to develop all of these skills itself. And so who did that? Different branches of the Revolutionary Guard. The Revolutionary Guard control the airports, they control the media, they control construction, they control everything.
Wow.
Okay. And so you've taken out the supreme leader. So what? The Revolutionary Guard can still function.
So you just put another figurehead and continue on.
Put another figurehead, or even don't put a figurehead. The thing is going to continue. And Khomeini was very smart. The fact that he got killed on that day was his decision.
He was just a sitting duck. He said, kill me, I'll become a martyr, and the whole nation will unite around me.
And not only the whole nation, Daisy, but all the Shia Muslims in the world.
Around the world.
For whom you have just taken out their Pope. And in Ramadan, it seems very calculated on both sides. He said, I'm not going to go and hide in a shelter. He died with his family, his daughter. So he knew what he was doing. And everything was set up. And the Revolutionary Guard and the axis of resistance is set up in a way that they don't need central command, Daisy.
Yeah, they're decentralized from what I understand.
And that's why the idea that you're going to keep bombing like their missiles and stuff, and that they're going to, no. And in fact, what is happening, I saw footage of this, are on their rooftops watching the bombings because their internet has been cut, We don't have air raid shelters. We don't have sirens. So people are literally out trying to see where the bombing is happening, and they're being shot on their rooftops by the regime. So they're being bombed by Israel and America, and they're being shot by their own regime. I have no words for this, because we didn't arrive at this moment in a few days. This is 47 years of sanctions have hurt ordinary people, killed ordinary people who can't get hold of medicine, and it has enabled an alternative economy that has been controlled by the IRGC. And so the regime has got richer and ordinary people have gotten poorer, and an incredible resilience of the Iranian people that they have managed to take this for 47 years. When I was doing a lot of activism work in the early 2000s, and we hoped that we could reform the system from the inside, and there was a lot of optimism. Many Iranians like me, hyphenated Iranians who'd had to leave, moved back home because we wanted to rebuild our country. The regime invited me into the embassy in London, and they wanted us back. Please bring your brain and your training and your education to your own country. And a lot of people were seduced by that. But at the end of the day, it made absolutely no difference. Iran didn't change. It got more and more hardline. And one of the reasons was because in those moments when there was the opportunity and the opening, it was not taken up. And so constantly, consistently, the regime got stronger. When Ahmadinejad came into power in the early 2000s, that's when the IRGC, because that's where he came from, really consolidated its hold on the country. And right now, I think one of the realities may be that the regime becomes a military dictatorship. And by the IRGC, it becomes even more hardline. And we don't know if Mr. Trump tomorrow will make a deal with them. Whatever it is that he wants, I assume he wants our oil and just lots of deals for American companies to come and take all of our resources and make lots and lots of money. We're the last untapped market. It's a huge market, 90 million people.
I wanted to just share with you my two instances where I got firsthand experience of the sanctions. I hosted a conference of wise women from around the globe, and of course I invited Iranian women. And then we realized that we actually couldn't pay for their airfare and their hotel because they were under sanctions. And so we had to go through the Iran desk at the State Department and OFAC rules to make sure that they paid their fare, and then we would compensate them when they arrived. And I remember the Iranian women had just arrived, and we were so petrified. I actually had a lawyer there with me. She told them, she said, make sure you don't eat the lunch. Make sure you don't consume anything that we have paid for. That's how insane this whole thing was. And then another recent incident, after I published my book, 30 Rights of Muslim Women, I got a call from a publisher in Iran. They really want to publish my book in Farsi, like they want to translate it. But there's no way for us to create a relationship.
No, because
that is how crazy it is. So I can't even get my book published in Farsi so people can somehow get influenced by my work.
Yeah, and you know what then happens, Daisy, is someone will just pirate your book, you know, and then it'll be in Farsi, but you won't know about it or have any. Yeah. And that's the thing, that this moment that we're at, it's taken nearly 50 years to bring us to this moment. This has not been set up today or yesterday. The whole sanction system has not particularly hurt the people of the regime, whose children are bearing their midriffs all over LA and London and blah, and they're all living the life with the money of our nation. But they've hurt ordinary people, and they've enabled actually the regime actors such as the IRGC to get rich and to get super embedded, because they've also cut Iran away from any sort of international community, even cultural ones, even intellectual ones. And because of sanctions, so for example, we can't send money home. If they want the regime to fall, it's not going to fall because, you know, you're indiscriminately bombing civilians.
You need an opposition, and you need to cultivate that opposition. You need to bring up leaders, and you need to support them. And that's how these counter-revolutions work.
And these things all exist inside Iran, but there's been an absolute hijacking of the narrative outside of Iran by extreme right-wing Iranians supporting the last Shah's son to come back, who have shut down all of this, and said that there's a binary, that Iranians are desperate and they can't get rid of the regime by themselves. The JCPOA, the nuclear agreement, was a huge thing. It was a moment of extreme happiness for everybody. We thought, this is it. We're going to start normalizing. The regime will change. Of course it will, because if European companies are pouring into Tehran. And then what happened? Trump came in, he tore it up, and he reimposed some really terrible sanctions. And then we had the snapback from Europe last year where they picked up all the sanctions again. And so you watch them bombing the country and then doubling down on sanctions to the point that is economic warfare, because what they wanted to do was drive people onto the streets, which they did, because that's how the protests started in December, because of the absolute collapse of our currency. And in those protests, Pezeshkian, the president, actually addressed the people and said, you're right, we're listening to you. And it was quite notable that the security forces were not reacting. Okay? And it was only when the last Shah's son got involved, and Donald Trump, and they started putting out announcements and saying, Iranian people, take to the streets and protest. I'm here. I'm with you. We're going to come and rescue you. And then various members of Trump's posse, let's call them, because I started tweeting, Mossad agents are on the ground with you. The regime went mad and massacred its own people. I'm not being an apologist for the regime. I'm just saying, if you're watching the situation from outside, you can see clearly that since this regime's utter paranoia is foreign interference, the moment that the foreigners literally say, yes, we are interfering, we're in your country, asking all of the people to go out and to protest, we're going to come and rescue you, we've got your back, get out there. They went there, they got killed, they got massacred in a way that has never happened in Iranian history. It's the most shocking thing. I can't tell you, Daisy, that there was the internet blackout, and after it lifted, the numbers have not been confirmed. Some people say 40,000. The confirmed numbers are 7,000. We're probably never going to know how many people were killed in just those 2 nights. And I don't need to know the numbers personally, because I've seen the faces of my friends. I've heard the voices of my people in Iran, and I have never, it's like their spirit was strangled in them. The regime did that, but some of the responsibility lies with the people who were provoking that. All the regime has ever said is foreigners, spies, it's not our people, all this ag agitation from the outside. So you gave them carte blanche to go in there and unleash the worst of their security apparatus on their own people. And don't think that's not what's happening in Iran right now. Iranians are dying, innocent Iranians, just pawns in some game between a bunch of powers who are just playing. And the idea that the regime is going to collapse, I'm afraid it's not looking at all true. I don't know if we're saying any of this on our mainstream media. There are thousands of Iranians mourning for Khamenei, thousands of them marching through the streets of Iran saying, we don't want this war. As an anti-war activist, which I was in the early 2000s, this was the whole point. You kill any kind of democratic movement. You kill all the grassroots. You kill all the hard work that Iranian women have done over the past 47 years to get themselves to this point. You've literally just killed it. And that's because why? Because if you could have sanctioned the right people, if you could have targeted the regime, if you could have made their lives difficult, if you could have made it impossible for them to move their money around the world, why does the regime own the most expensive houses in London? Are you telling me our governments couldn't have acted in that way instead of the way in which they acted? And American statespeople have come out and said with open smiles, economic warfare. We wanted to make Iranians so desperate that they would go out onto the streets and take down their own regime. So this has been calculated. Yeah. It's disgusting to me.
Yeah, but of course, the people who run intel departments know what the structure is, and they know it's impossible to take down the entire government and all of the tentacles that you said are with the IRGC. I wanted to just talk about 2 types of people, the clerical and their supporters, and then the Iranian seeking freedom, right? So do you think that there are the types of people who reject the repression, condemn the violence against the protesters, but also opposed to foreign intervention and forced regime change? Are there people like that?
I think the majority of Iranians are like that. As a journalist, as someone who works with story, I've been watching this narrative on Iran for a really long time, and I can see now it coming to a head during Women Life Freedom, which was a movement that the West could really get alongside, which was something very real and very powerful and very much grassroots, no leadership, amazing. Let's leave that aside and just think about what it meant outside of the country. We started to get this thing where finally in the West, people stopped thinking that the Iranian people were the regime. Because for most of my life, Daisy, people have treated me like I'm about to blow them up. You go, I'm Iranian, they step back. I think in 2022, we saw the differentiation. So we saw that people finally realized that the people are not the regime. And then, unfortunately, there was overlaid a slightly Orientalist narrative on that, whereby suddenly the West goes, we've got to rescue Iranian women, like they did with Afghani women. So there was that. And then at that point, I saw something really curious happen in Diaspora. We were all desperate. Desperate. Certain people moved into positions of influence through social media, etc. And they decided, because they had money, to take and become our voice, to become the voice of Iranians inside Iran, and to crunch the news that it was really difficult to verify and to know whether it was coming or not, and to present it as if it was fact. And then you had actually news outlets following these diaspora groups and taking what they said as if they were news briefings. But these people are not journalists, and they do have an agenda. Even if we might like their agenda, nonetheless, there is an agenda. Those people very much took over. At that point, Iranians outside of the country decided to band together and form an Iranian opposition group. And they contained people like Shirin Ebadi, who was the Nobel Peace Prize winner, who had been a lawyer inside Iran and who's now living in exile. So she carries quite a lot of weight, okay? We had a couple of actresses who decided to speak out. We had the last Shah's son, a Canadian activist who'd lost his wife and daughter on that plane that they shot down, a supposed women's rights activist Iranian who is actually in the State Department. So we had this motley crew who decided they were the Iranian opposition in exile, and they held press conferences and they took the narrative. Now, that fell apart within a few months because the last Shah's son, his people were intimidating the other people on this supposed council. And so that fell apart. And at that point, the only people who were left were a couple of actresses. So it was a really strange turn of narrative at that point. And then, of course, what we've seen with the bombing, followed by the economic strangulation of ordinary Iranians, followed by the protests, followed by the massacre, what we've seen is that Pahlavi, for a long time, has been inviting Israel and the US to interfere. He has then actively started asking them to bomb his own country, and they have a lot of money. They have there's been a huge influx inside Iran, I would say, in the last 6-7 years of pro-Pahlavi social media accounts. Outside of Iran, there has been a narrative that has been being pushed. The people behind it are generally the countries that are actually illegally bombing us right now. And so a lot of Iranians were pulled into that faction. A lot of Iranians decided that the only viable opposition is Pahlavi because people know about him. And people have been saying, Daisy, it's amazing to me, exactly word for word what people said during the 1979 revolution. Like, I had to point this out to the BBC last week, and it was amazing to me that they didn't know. Before the revolution, everyone went, okay, let's coalesce under Khomeini. And he said exactly what Reza Pahlavi is saying now. I don't want power. I just want to come back to Iran. I'm going to be a transition guy. And guess what? He wants a referendum, a yes or no referendum, exactly like last time. And he and his supporters have shut down every other voice, either by intimidation or by saying, shh, this is not the time for debate. This is not the time for this. We just need to get rid of them. That's all we have to focus on. Shut up until we've got rid of them. That is exactly what they said during the 1979 revolution. That is how you strangle debate, you kill, and then you have, therefore, all of us who have been brainwashed into believing that there is no alternative. It's a simple binary. You either have to have the regime who is killing you, or you have to be bombed in order to get rid of them so that we can bring in this guy who has not in nearly a week, up to some maybe about 6,000 Iranians killed up until this point. He has not yet said any condolences to his own people, and yet he tweeted when 3 American servicemen were killed and said condolences to them, to their families, to this great American nation. This is the man that they want to come in. And I genuinely don't think he has that kind of support inside the country. I think it's very superficial. Essentially, it's that playbook. And I've said that it's the wrong thing to say, isn't it? Let's just get rid of these people and then we'll see. No, we need to think about what's next. We need to think about what is that next vision. You're going to go in, have a referendum, 99% are going to vote for your monarchy or whatever, but where's the debate? I'm afraid there's been a rather fake binary created. And I think that things like sanctions have strangled the possibility for grassroots movements to do what they do, to build up different centers of power, to build up organizations. Decent Iranians also outside, they can't support civil society because you saw how difficult it was. We can't collect money and send it to the workers so that they can afford to strike for a year and paralyze the country. That's how this stuff works.
Luckily for us in the United States, in the diaspora spaces, we are seeing some divergent opinions. The way the U.S. went in and attacked, I think that's created a lot of anxiety for the diaspora as well, because not knowing what's going to come, right? Like the goalpost keeps moving. And now the end game is a holy war. We're bringing in the end times. So I think that the voices that were calling for Pahlavi to come back are now saying, wait, was this about regime change or is it about Jesus now?
There's going to be people that don't see that. There's going to be lots of apologists. It's been really shocking to me, Daisy, because we have a very courteous culture, is the tenor of the abuse. It's really amazing. It's not how we speak to each other. I get how incredibly traumatized all Iranians are, but particularly those whose entire life has been under the Islamic Republic. And a lot of people who are out, who are in their 30s or 40s, they are real proper refugees since birth. They've been strangled by this Islamic regime, which is not content with controlling what you do out there. They want to come into your bedroom and sniff your breath. I've lived in the Islamic Republic of Iran. I've experienced a tiny bit of what my countrymen have experienced. It's been their daily life. So I get it. I get that they're out there and they're dancing and they're celebrating because this man represents something that has been a boot on their neck. But let's see how that is going to pan out. And yes, indeed, what is the objective of the war? And Daisy, right now, the fact that the figures killed jumped from last night from 1,000 to 6,000, like this is not going okay. And the World Health Organization this is a statistic from last night. By now it might be double, but they've monitored 13 attacks on healthcare facilities in Iran. We're talking about healthcare medical centers and hospitals being hit. There is an unverified report also that says that the main pharmaceutical company, its big factory and headquarters, also hit. So that means no medicine. We can't import medicine because of sanctions.
Very strategic.
And what's disgusting about this strategy is it's paying the crisis forward, because it's saying even if we stop bombing tomorrow, look at all the people who are going to die because they can't get hospital care, because they can't get medicine. Iran is a very big, sophisticated and functional country. So it's not going to go to its knees from a week of bombing, but they are destroying infrastructure that is going to impact people.
Because we're winding down, and I wanted to ask you personally, watching your motherland suffer from afar, what does it feel like for you? You are very deeply connected, but yet you're powerless to intervene in any meaningful way.
I don't really know how to describe it to you. I have literally spent my adult career trying to not arrive at this moment. So when I watch the streets that I grew up on being bombed, I feel like my own body is being violated. I'm really sorry. There's no way I can explain this to people. Didn't want to feel like this. I didn't know that this is how it felt. And so I have to work really hard at being able to function, because I can't help anybody. I can only hear from certain members of my family. There's no way. I have huge family that I love a lot in Kurdistan. I've been hearing for the last 2 days that they're bombing, that now America is trying to make the Kurds start a ground war. I can say words like it's unbearable, and yet we bear it. So how does it feel? It feels very hard. It's a roller coaster. And if I sit down and I watch too many images and I really think about it, then I just fall apart. It's my homeland, and it's amazing because people say, oh, I didn't realize you still have family. Then I just think every single one of those 90 million people is my family. Every bit of dirt on that soil is my body. This is our homeland. We've been there for a really long time. And then I go, we can rebuild. We can rebuild. But you're destroying UNESCO heritage sites, Daisy. You're destroying human culture. This isn't just Iranian stuff. It belongs to all of humanity.
So if we had to end with a more forward-looking note, when you think about your country's future, culturally, politically, spiritually, is there anything that gives you hope? And also what concerns you the most? Well, let's start with the concern first, and then
so that we can end on
just end with the hope.
Please, let's try. Okay, I don't know what I'm the most scared of, because every scenario is so scary. I'm really scared that they're going to balkanize Iran, that they have been arming and training our ethnic minorities and fomenting discontent for a really long time, and now they're trying to literally push the Iranian Kurds into making a ground war. That's my fear. They will try to balkanize us, and we will face decades of some kind of a civil war.
Can I just ask you a question which I did not ask you before? What is the ethnic makeup of Iran?
So it's about 50 to 60% Persian.
Which is Farsi-speaking people, right? Farsi-speaking people, Persian-speaking.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, Fars is a province in the center of Iran. That is where those kings came from that conquered the world. And because the Greeks they called them the Perse. They didn't have F, so we became P. So the Farsis became the Persians. And so that was the Persian Empire. Iran is actually, the Iranic people contains many different ethnicities, of which one is the Persian. Of course, it's the dominant
the majority.
Majority, 50 to 60%. The biggest other ethnicity under that, I think, is the Azeri. Azeris are like Turks. We have a province called Azerbaijan. Maybe they're 20-something, right? The Kurds are about 10%. And then you also have the Baluchis. We have the Turkoman, who are like the Turkmenistan over there. We have the Marsh Arabs. So we have all of these different ethnicities who have for millennia all had their own culture, their own language, their own dress, etc., but yet been also Iranian. And this is something that I'm constantly explaining to people. None of us want to see Iran broken up. Iran has had its form. Iran was not a country that was formed with rulers and men sitting around a map at the end of a war. It wasn't created out of the Ottoman Empire and by kind of the Brits or this or that.
Iran with their rulers and drawing straight lines.
Iran has held its present borders more or less since, I think, the Safavids. So we're talking about 15th century. Okay. And then before that, we already talked about millennia back. So I really want to think that this isn't going to happen, that Iranians, the ethnicities, are not going to do this. However, they are always discriminated against, and particularly the Islamic regime has done that a lot. So that would be my worst nightmare, is a protracted sort of civil war and chaos, and us turning into what they've managed to do to so many other countries in that region, Iraq, Syria, so endless war and chaos.
They want to defang the country, and the only way to defang it is to break it up. So that would be the worst nightmare. Is
to plunge it into permanent chaos and to breaking it up. So you get a bunch of estans that are sponsored and given money, like by the US and trade and a vassal states, and then you get like a kind of Persia in the middle there, which then all the people will love because they can call it Persia again.
The Californians will be so delighted.
Right, they'll love all that. And then you don't have to worry about it, right? Because then you're going to have kind of Persia surrounded by all of these new estans, and they're just going to keep on fighting each other for like resources constantly, for water, for stuff like that. That would be my worst nightmare. And then alongside that, what then happens is all of us Iranians in the West get interred into concentration camps because we're Iranian. That's that let's not forget that side of it, because I also have that concern. Anyway, so that's my worst nightmare. What is my hope?
Please give us some hope.
Daisy, I can't give you a scenario because I don't see quite from where we are now, the place that we've been forced to be. I don't quite know how it can end well. But I'm going to try and pull out and take a longer view. And I'm going to say that our very language reflects what survivors Iranians are. Our very culture reflects our deep connection to the earth, to the seasons, to nature, the beauty of our culture, and the kindness of the Iranian heart will prevail. And so the thing that gives me the greatest hope is how Iranians inside Iran have been taking care of each other, how they make groups in their neighborhoods, how they look out for each other, how they raise money so that Blah's daughter that was shot in the eye in the protest can have an operation, how they take care of each other. And here in Diaspora, I must say that even though we have the crazy faction, outside of the crazy faction, whose mouthpieces are busy attacking us all, the rest of us, when we connect with each other, it's amazing. So my hope comes out of the quality of connection and love that the Iranian heart can hold.
With that note, I can tell you my own experience with every Iranian I know is the most cultured, the most refined, the nicest, most hospitable people I have ever met. And despite all the challenges they've been going through, they have really been able to hold themselves up with the kind of poise and resilience I have not seen in other people. And with that note, I hope that maybe this war is meant to serve a bigger purpose, which is de-imperializing the whole region. I'm hoping that something good comes out of this, including for the people of Iran, that maybe the religious factions can have some soul searching, because in my interaction with Iranians, whether through its conferences or intellectual discourses, it's really hard for me to look at the kind of Islam that is being portrayed in Iran and tie it to the Quran that I'm reading. I don't see any of that oppression and enforcement and politicization anywhere in the Quran. I'm like, where does this all come from? And I think that you've painted a really good picture of how this whole regime got so politicized and got so entrenched because of the sanctions and the continuation ostracizing and pushing them up against the wall. I hope that our audiences will leave with much better understanding of who the Iranian people are and the complexity, and so that as you witness the war unfolding, you understand that there are real people behind this nation, not just what you read in the headlines. And so let us pray that this all turns into something positive for the globe, not just for the Iranian people. Because having to bear this kind of pain for this many years has to result in something. Something new has to be born out of it.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Thank you so much, Kamin.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on Wise Women. If something stirred in you today, don't let it stop here. Share this episode with someone who needs it. Reflect on what resonated for you. And definitely plant one seed of change, however small. Remember, you do matter. And your actions have a ripple effect. But none of us can rise alone. To explore more resources and ways to get involved, do visit my website, daisycon.com. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, because every click is your way of amplifying this message to others. Wisdom isn't just heard, my friends, it's lived. So let's live it. Until next time, stay wise and stay rooted.